How's it going? It's good to see you,
Going pretty
man.
well. Doing well. Good to see you.
Welcome to another
Ah,
episode OTXNT. We have not done this. It's been a few weeks, probably. I think the last one we did was Southern Baptist Convention. So here we are.
yeah. I think we promised people a part two to that, which we've got to get to, but we've only got a little time today, so we're just
Well,
gonna
we got
jump in.
VBS has kind of gotten in the way right now.
You had kids camp,
Preparation.
right?
Kids
Yeah.
camp has gotten in the way, vacation. So we'll do it. And we need to do that because we need to talk about the IVF stuff. But today, I thought I would turn this episode of OTX into more of what I like to do on my podcast, which is more of like newsy kind of things on my theological sidebars one. So I have an article I'd like to read to you. Comes from CBN, and actually it came out today. Um, and here is the title for you, Andrews. This is something maybe you should take heed, listen to, even though I know you're not in the same state. Here it is. Kirk Cameron didn't feel safe, that's in quotations, in California, and he moved family to a state that values, and he quotes, God, family, and country. Now, you and I already discussed this prior to. I wanted to find out what state that was. So the first line of this article then says, on the eve of America's birthday, actor Kirk Cameron announced he has fled California for where? Tennessee, baby. This is where he's at. I don't know where he's at in Tennessee. I would assume he's probably in
We
this
should
Nashville
we
area.
should get him on. We should have a brave book segment or something and
Hey, if I find him at the grocery store, I'm going to let him know that I'd like to hang out with him. So this is something I think is just interesting as we think through this, because you and I have talked a little bit about this. There was a book that came out that I read last year. I think it was called what is it? Fight by Flight. And it
yeah,
was
yeah, Joel Webbin, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Joel Webbin writes that book, and it's just an interesting concept. It's the question of um, should should people who are in states that are primarily, as they would say, blue state, where they're especially where things have gotten pretty crazy, like a California, should they leave those states? Should Christians leave those states and go to more of a more of the Bible Belt, or move to more of a Christian friendly state? And so, in the big question, I guess, that comes down, and so I want to throw it out to you is, there's two thoughts, right? Two major thoughts. One is stay because you don't want to lose that Christian witness where you're at, and the other is go and rebuild and strengthen what's left. So, what do you think? Because we've thought about this in passing for probably more than a year or
yeah.
two now, because this stuff has been happening for a while. But what do you think about that whole thing?
Yeah, I think there's articles, there's things that have come out about the great shaking and how the red states are becoming redder, the blue states are becoming bluer, and it's just kind of it's a natural process, really. It's not something that a lot of people think hard about. They just kind of look at opportunity and they move accordingly. But the pressure on a spiritual front, spiritual opportunity is something that a lot of people have a hard time grasping. If you had a good job opportunity in a red state, people would say, "Oh, he went for his job." But if you said, "Hey, I think my family would be better equipped to keep the faith if we move to a Christian place," people would say, "Oh, how dare you? You're abandoning the mission."
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting deal because I think it's motivated by very similar desires, and I think that's something that Christians should be able in good conscience to do. But I think that there obviously is something to being missional. We didn't pray though. We need to pray before we get too deep in because this is OTXNT.
You're right.
It's
You're right. I just hopped into my other one. So
yeah,
you
yeah.
pray and then we'll start.
All right, let's go. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, even in the prayer, you're praying that God will keep you from evil, right?
Yeah.
There's this desire for Christians to not be in the most evil of all places, especially for families. And I think that's the important key here is that And I thought Joel Webben made a good case for this. And I think it really needs to be something that is individualistic in how you and your family are going to prayerfully go where God leads. But we don't typically say, hey, you know what? Every Christian family has to live in North Korea because they need the gospel there. No, what we would do is try to equip very key people that are prepared for that type of a battle, and then prepare them and give them, cover and all this kind of stuff, because it's illegal and it's dangerous. And, they need to be a special breed of people that are going to go be missionaries in a place like that. And I think what is shocking when you make that parallel is, are there places in America that are becoming so inhospitable to Christianity that choosing as a Christian to live there requires a special preparation. And that for most of us that are seeking to live quietly in our own world, might be better suited to go live in a redder state or a more pro-Christian state. And I think there's something to that. I think that the people that are, no, we've got to stay here. I don't think that necessarily, we shouldn't guilt anybody into making that decision, because America was founded on people who said we have to flee an inhospitable climate of religious persecution, and find a place that we could at least do our own thing. And that's what founded America for the most part. So in one breath, the people that love America and say we've got to reclaim this territory forget that it was founded by people who were being driven out from their homeland because they weren't able to practice their faith in a way that they thought God wanted them to do so. So I think this is really an American value, but it is kind of sad that we've lost so much territory.
It's interesting as I think through this, because as somebody who moved from the West to Tennessee, to me, for our move here, it was not because we were seeking to get out, or we were seeking to go somewhere. I have roots in this state. And this is just the door that was opened up. It was not, I mean, we loved where we were at, but when we were especially when we were in Arizona, we loved it there. But I do think, and I do think for those who, I meet so many people who are here now where I'm at, and if you go and you read the article about Kirk Cameron, he talks about how many Californians he bumps into. I can affirm that probably half the people I bump into, at least where I live now, are from California. And there is something to it. A lot of people who have fled to come here. I call us the California refugees, even though I don't really see myself as a refugee. But it's one of those things that people are they've left. And so yeah, was that a right move for them? I think there's people who are they're gonna be working through that in their mind of like, did I make the right? Should I have gone for the harder thing? And that's one thing I thought was interesting in the book. And if you'd like to read it, like Andrew and I have been talking about, it's called Fight by Flight by Joel Webben. And one of the things that he talks about is sometimes in Christianity, we try to make out to be the more difficult path is the right path. Right. And that's not the case at all. That he talks about when he wanted to plant his church, and this stuck out with me, this story. He wanted to plant his church in San Diego, and he just stuck it out. And he wanted to make it where everybody else has failed and nobody else was able. He was going to make sure he did it right. And that he said there's almost sometimes there was almost a pride of why he stuck around for so long, because he wanted to say, as difficult as it is, I will prevail. And honestly, I think you see that even in some missionaries too, of I'm going this because it's the most difficult place. That may not be what God's plan is for you to be in the most difficult place. And I think the other thing is, I think there's nothing wrong for Christians to want to live stable and calm places. I mean, I just threw open right here at 1 Timothy chapter 2, as he talks about prayer. He says, in verse 1, first then I urge petitions and prayers and intercessions and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. This is good, and it pleases God our Savior, who wants everyone to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. So it's a good thing to pray for calm, and calm so that the gospel can go out, but a calm, quiet life. And so I don't think that that's wrong to say, hey, I want to pursue something better for my family. So for those people who maybe are listening saying, I don't know, do we stay? Do we go? Like, I like what you said is it's a personal choice that you have to make. Um, but there's nothing super spiritual about making things harder. And there's nothing super spiritual about saying, I'm trying to go to where it can be a calmer, easier place for us. What does matter though is whatever place that you go, whether you stay or not, is you have to be thinking about being in the Great Commission. And the one thing about
Right.
coming out here is what you're finding out now is you're finding people who are who I would say a lot of them, there's a cultural piece that you need to speak into that and you need to disciple that and to disciple and evangelize them out of a cultural kind of understanding to what the true gospel is. And there's a lot of other people that maybe didn't grow up with any of this who are out here now. And so there's a couple things I think about that, like, regardless of whether you stay or go, there's a mission field there. It's not like it's just filling up with Christians.
Yeah.
That place doesn't exist. It's filled with a bunch of Christians and there's no evangelism going on. And but what if God has you go for a reason so that you might evangelize those new people who he's bringing to the area? So I think you need to think that through.
Yeah, I think that we don't want to flee the world. Christ said that basically that's not possible. That we're going to have to be in the world, just not of it. And so it's not. I think I've got problems even in church history about those that would flee society and go be monks out in the middle of nowhere. That's, I don't think, a biblical thing. I think there's a time maybe to go and have some isolation between you and the Lord, discerning a call, preparing for something, but we need to be engaged with our society and our culture. And so I have problems with the Amish approach, which someone would say, hey, isn't that what you're doing? And I would say, no, that's not what I think is being discussed in this type of a situation. It's more of that certain parts of our society in America have really become anti-Christian, and they're leveraging forces of education and even just law to make it difficult on Christians to live as Christians in their own society. And so in that situation, yeah, persecution, it's soft persecution. I don't like the word persecution, but it's made life hard. And so seeking for a place where it looks maybe like California looked in the 80s, it's still somewhere that needs the gospel. I think also one of the things I'm excited about, and this is what I think is helpful strategically about the fight for flight idea, fight by flight, is the goal is to reach California. The goal is to reach New York. It's to reach these places, but the need right now is to have a home front that's solid, so that we can then have a missional sending force. And we've got such lukewarm Christianity in so many places that you're offering a counter gospel that is almost more destructive than secularism, because it gives this peace that people can have. Oh, I'm a Christian, but I buy into everything that the wicked culture says is good. So having a fallback, a retreat, saying, okay, we're going to claim this area and it's going to be strong. And we're going to set Christian laws, and we're going to have a Christian government, or a government that is filled with Christian representatives. And the desire is then that would be a very strong place for future missional work to go out. I think there's something to that. And I think that we've moved past this idea that a neutral space works for Christians. A neutral space is just slow decline. And so what I think is helpful about Christians saying we're going to go and gather together is if that pairs with an idea of establishing Christian governance, not church as state, but Christians actively working to establish a pro-Christian government.
Yeah.
That would allow us to bring Christianity back into the schools. I was excited. We could have actually talked about the law that came out that they've got to have the 10 Commandments and the Bible's taught in schools. I don't know if that was Louisiana. This idea is that, hey, we're not going to play on our heels. We're not going to just pretend that Christianity needs to be set aside as we go into the public sphere. It's harder to do that in California. There's no Republicans in California, and the Republicans that you have would think that would be a horrible approach. But you've got states that approach is a good approach, and it's already kind of being implemented, where most of the legislature is filled with church-going Christians. I think that that's an exciting opportunity, and it's important to recognize that that's a strategy that's being employed by non-Christians. And I'm thinking of Michigan and how Islam has targeted certain cities in Michigan to try to create an Islamic stronghold that they can then have political representatives come from. And they've been working on this for years, and they've established it largely in Michigan. So Christians, we don't have to follow the devil, but we can learn from tactics that are being used by non-Christians, and of course, religions opposed to Christianity. So I think that there's some value there. And so Kirk Cameron, God bless him. I'm still trying to figure out if Arizona has turned blue or if it's really purple. I don't think we've had very fair elections in the last 2 to 4 years in Arizona. A lot of shenanigans.
Here comes the disclaimer to this video. Watch, we're going to have
it's just everybody here knows, right? And of course, we made national news. And unfortunately, there's just a fear of being pegged. But I don't really know. The next election will be really telling for Arizona. But I'm increasingly becoming concerned. And of course, I live in the blue part of the state, anyway. And so I've kind of grown up here. But yeah, it's something I've thought about. The Lord hasn't given me a license to go. So I'm sticking around.
I want to piggyback off of that. I think there's the other side of this and I think this is why you can't just paint with such broad strokes and just say everybody who stays, who does this is this, or everybody who leaves is this. I think that God calls people to be in those areas. And I think God has wired people to be in those areas in the same way that you see our missionaries that are wired to go to certain countries, to live a certain way, to go by those customs and the language and everything. I think that's something to keep in mind, is that God has wired some people to say, this is my home, this is where I'm at, I'm staying put, and I'm going to do with what I've got here. I do think, so God does that. I think God also calls people to say, it's time to move and it's time to create something new. Something's really interesting and I can't remember if this was in the book or if this was stuff that I was just learning about pretty much last year, which is what it's been fascinating to watch, is what's been happening since the big shakeup that's happened. And really COVID kind of expedited all of this, like shakeup of people moving out of certain states into other states. And so not only can you see that states like blue states are losing, people, and I was watching, someone was talking yesterday about all the finances involved too, how much money is moved just from businesses. But this is the thing I think is the absolutely coolest piece of this all, is what's happening to people as they move from some of these areas where maybe they've not been around as much of a Christian culture as when they come to one. So I kind of, for a while, I would say probably about 10 years ago, I was more kind of inclined towards some of the Russell Moore opinions. Russell Moore is big on anti-Christian culture kind of thing. He doesn't like, he wrote that one book, and it influenced me for a time until I kind of saw where he was going, and I rejected the trajectory of this. But it was more of this approach that he really has a distaste for cultural Christianity. And for a while I understood, I don't like people who just are a Christian in name or they've grown up that way and they don't, but there's still some good soil that can come, and some good things that can come in that. That being said, here's an anecdote to the debate about, being in a culturally Christian area too. Some of the stories that have come out of the past couple of years are very similar, of people who have lived in areas where they did not have churches really nearby or any thriving kind of Christian community, who come to the area and they begin to recognize that there's a lot of Christians around them, and that the Christians go to churches in these areas. And so many of these stories are very similar. They go something like this. Came to the area, we didn't have church, never grew up in church, but saw all these people going to church. So we thought, hey, what the heck? Let's just go to church. Let's try what they do. And over time, these people get saved because they come to areas and they start meeting real Christians, and they start seeing that kind of generally things close down because culturally everybody just kind of goes, well, why don't we kind of do what the culture does? And what you're seeing is that God, as he's shifting people, and I think, whether they know it or not, it's ultimately God's the one shifting people all the way around the country. He's the one influencing them and opening their eyes, and they're coming to know him as a result. And so I think that's a cool piece of this, which is the missional piece that's taking place as people are being moved into new areas, and what that does, what that culture can do to people, especially if people are fleeing. And I would say a lot of these people, they're not fleeing for religious reasons. They're fleeing because they're saying, I want to have a better paycheck. I want a safer place to live. Those people, it's crazy what God is doing. And I will say this, I'm seeing this on my end, where, people, you get nervous because your area gets flooded with people from a different state, and you're worried about the culture. But there's another piece of this, and I totally get that. I would 100% agree. Don't California my Tennessee, right? I get that sentiment. But you also have to recognize the tremendous potential that is here now of people that are here from all over, and they're in this culture now, and they're in a new place, and so the ability to reach people who maybe would not have been had much of a culture around them, a Christian culture. So, anyways, I think it's some interesting things to think through for sure.
Well, and it is interesting too, and I do wonder legally what's allowable, but you go into the scripture and you go into even some of the early American documents, and there were limitations on a foreigner coming and just jumping in and being able to have all the rights and privileges, right, of the citizen. And in America, we're all American citizens, but once upon a time, and of course, some of this is changes from the Civil War, and I like most of those changes. I'm not a pro-slavery guy, but we changed some laws, and the reality is, I would love if someone from California wanted to move to Arizona, that they would have to sit out of the electoral Arizona process for 5 years and become Arizonan.
Yeah.
Because what really is going on is the red states tend to be more Christian, and they are heirs of the Deuteronomic blessings. We've done it God's way. God promises to bless if you do it his way. And so these states are pro-business, and they're economically doing well. And a lot of that is because that's the way God says he's set things up to work. So if you do it God's way, he'll bless. But you bring in people from outside who en masse aren't in agreement with this, and they're going to Californiaize, your Tennessee or Arizona. And it won't be long before you bring in unionization, and you bring in restrictions. And most of these things are business killers. Arizona's minimum wage is mimicking California. Every study done on minimum wage shows that it's a bad idea, and we just keep jacking it up because it makes people feel better. I don't know what we can do, but I'm hoping that we end up moving more towards an Articles of Confederation down the road, where local states will become much more, we are the United States of America, rather than this is the United States of America. And we can kind of say, hey, Florida's going to have a distinct flavor, and if you're from California, you won't like it here. But I do think the advantage is everyone coming to Tennessee from California, even if it's economics, a lot of what really is going on is these are people uncomfortable in California.
Yeah.
And some of them they're actually going to bring a more conservative bent to Tennessee than Tennessee has, because they're going to come in with an attitude of, I have seen where this goes. And if we're soft and if we don't actually take stands, this is going to turn into something so dark. And so I think that you do get a few of those that are almost zealots that show up. And I think that makes some of the establishment folks a little bit nervous. But I don't know. I'm all for it if people feel like there's a better opportunity. And why would a spiritual desire for my family fall less of a priority than an economic?
Yeah.
And if moving my family for an economic purpose is valuable and everyone recognizes that, you just got to do what you got to do, why would a spiritual desire be less? And I would just caution those that want to go this direction that if you're just trying to put your kids in a bubble and your family in a bubble so that they never have to come into confrontation with the world, you might not be equipping them for the day that they do have to stand. So, the reality is that we can't escape the world, so we do need to figure out what to do. But some places are just really difficult. I'll say one thing: Arizona, with their ESA school credit, where I can send my kids to any private school and the state of Arizona will give me an allowance for that, is one of the main reasons that I want to stay in Arizona. And Tennessee doesn't have that.
Nope.
Because they think the public schools are good enough, and they're not, because they're still being given their marching orders from the United States Department of Education.
Yeah.
And so some people in Tennessee aren't alerted to the problems that we are out here in places like California and Arizona. So those are some of the things that just because you leave doesn't mean it's not necessarily greener on the other side, I would say.
Well, I'll say, I'd say that I think there's been some good stuff to be said here. I think it's clear. Like, I think in all of this, whatever move you make, you need to, it needs to be consulted with the Lord. But there's, I think we come back to, there's nothing unspiritual about wanting to seek a better life for your family, to move, whether that's for better job or better neighborhoods, better school, all of that. There's nothing wrong with that. You want to lay that at the Lord's feet, and there's absolutely nothing super spiritual about saying, I will stay in the hard areas because I'm going to do it. That might actually be more erring on the side of pride than that.
Right.
One thing I would say too, it's interesting in the Webben book, and I've only got about 2 minutes left, man. I'm sorry. But the Webben book, he mentions, I thought this is an interesting argument of talking about what God asks of Christian families to be able to do, to be able to disciple the kids, to be able to make it to where if the wife can stay and to be especially tend to the littlest ones, things like that. He said in a lot of these states, the cost of living. Now, granted, this is almost difficult almost anywhere now, but some of these places, especially, it's insane how expensive it can be in some of these areas. And so that you can't even fulfill that. Even if you wanted to say, hey, for the sake of the family, I want one to be able to stay home. And so I'll work. You can't. You've got to work 1 or 2 jobs, and your spouse got to work 1 or 2. And he said, so like some of this flight piece is also helping you to fulfill what God has designed and wanted for the family. It's just interesting little pieces, things I never really thought about when read the book. But once again, I saw that article. I thought, hey, it's kind of an interesting thing to consider and to just walk through. And I do think everybody should be prayerfully looking at, okay, who God has brought here. And it's totally cool. I think it's totally legitimate to be a little nervous about what's coming and who's where, but also at the same time to ask God to see, to see people for who they are and why they would be coming and what's going on, and then what the opportunity would be as well. So if for you who are already somewhere, if you're not already moved. So that's all I got, man. I just thought it'd be a one to look at.
I would say we do intend to do a video on some other issues with the SBC and then on the Republican platform. That's a big one that we wanted to do. We didn't have enough time. But a lot of what's going on with trying to pass stuff down to the states and not have a federal view is another key tie into this. I do think this will be a driver. If we approach abortion as a state issue, that's going to drive a lot of people as well, and it'll actually continue to shake things out. So this kind of feeds into that, and that's the video that we're planning on doing. So stick with us. Like it.
Hard-hitting stuff in the next couple weeks. Next week, look for that video to drop. You ready to finish up?
Yep. Close
All right,
out.
let's do it. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. Hey, guys, thanks for watching. God bless. Take care.
Bye.